You're listening to Monday Matters, a Principal Matters podcast production.
Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, along with my co-host, Jen Schwanke, welcoming you to another Monday Matters. Jen, as we step into the end of March 24th is when this recording is going to be coming out. For first-time listeners, welcome. If you want to check out our flagship show, we post on Wednesdays our interviews with amazing education leaders, and then on Fridays we do encore episodes. But Dr. Jen Schwanke, author and presenter and speaker and deputy superintendent, is my co-host, and I'm Will Parker from the Owasso, Oklahoma area. Jen, I was talking to you about this with you off the air, but I just thought it would be great to push record and discuss some of the responses we're hearing from our friends around the Dear Colleague letter that came out from the U.S. Department of Education, one of their assistant secretaries. I can't even remember the name of it, his specific title, but the letter that came out a couple of weeks ago, back in February, talking about civil rights, but also warning schools to quote unquote eliminate their diversity, equity, inclusion, or to modify those programs. So I just wanted to go there. If you're listening to this, we can put a link to the letter in the show notes. But I've had a variety of responses from people that I've talked to about this. But I just wanted to start with some of the thoughts that you've had as you've been reading these things coming around with the new administration.
Right. Yeah. Hi, everyone. This letter was kind of the letter that was heard around the world, right? And yet it didn't get to everybody in a consistent way. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about this letter. And my goal in this podcast is not to ever add my opinion, because I think the important thing about a letter like this is we read it, we decide what it means for our students and our schools and our teachers. How we react personally can be kind of in a different bucket, so to speak. So I think what's so interesting about this is what appears to be a bit of a tension between rumors that the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, may not exist anymore. And yet the Dear Colleague letter implies that it will, because the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights is the one that's, apparently going to investigate and act on this. And Will, you didn't mention, but the department did roll out a reporting form for offenders, or for someone who feels that they have seen an offender, which, many teachers saw that and were justifiably shaken by that, because, what does that mean? What does that mean? What does enforcement look like? Who's looking at it? Can someone flood the reporting with false allegations? A lot of questions that really need to be answered. So I've done a lot of reading about it. I guess I think that the important thing to talk about for you and I is the existence of it, and that anyone who reads that letter, just push pause and think, read, ask, don't act quite yet.
Yeah. So I did pull the letter up so that I could reference it more succinctly, and we'll put a link in the show notes. I'm sure everybody has seen it by now. But Craig Traynor, who's the acting assistant secretary for civil rights, and his title includes the U.S. Department of Education now, I looked him up. He is a former attorney, and he's a former attorney from a very far right-wing conservative group. So there's a reason that this letter came out, written by someone whose language is obviously constructed in a way that in some ways is kind of redefining what discrimination is. And so when you read the letter at first glance, and I'm just going to put on my English teacher hat, Jen, because when I read the letter at first glance, the old English teacher in me was like, this is some really weird rhetoric, because the definitions are stated in ways that contradict the definitions, even within the letter itself. And so when I've had this conversation with other leaders, here are some of the things that they've said to me. So I'm going to first just go there. Some of them have said this feels like culture war. So this feels like there's an agenda here that's trying to create, in some cases, a perception for people where for them it may be the perception, may be their reality, but for others, it's a completely different reality. The other responses that I've had to this is some people who've read it have told me that their legal counsel has said things to them like, you should take this seriously because you need to revisit your policies and websites, et cetera. But I wouldn't take it literally because trying to take it literally is really difficult when it's written as a dear colleague letter, which is not law, it's not policy, it's guidance. And so already, Jen, when you put that policy hat on as a school leader, this is what makes it so hard to be a school leader because you're already leading and directing. But then when you get something like this, then you have to figure out, okay, how do we actually apply this in a way that is sensible to where I live without alarming other people, but also responding to people's concerns.
Right. And this letter brings up a lot more questions than answers for many of us. And I think, again, the question of the role of the U.S. Department of Education is there. The fact that we all know many probationary federal staff have been cut, including attorneys and investigators, by the way. And so therefore, if the U.S. Department of Education has lost experienced staff and OCR no longer is able to meet their own processing times or relatively reasonable processing times, that leads to the question of how do you report? I mean, and again, that's buried on the functional reporting of an infraction is buried on the page, and it's not clear how anyone even files it, how an individual files, or so on. So, and then how they're investigated is unclear. And so, I think you're right. I think it's definitions. I think it's processes. I think it's repercussions. All of that is very unclear. I received got my hands on an email that was sent from a group that is a Title IX administrators group. And it was fascinating because it included statistics about how many complaints the OCR processes on in a typical year. And what I learned was, last year was the highest volume of complaints that the OCR received, and it was almost 23,000 complaints. When you break that down, you can see that that volume and the time required for an accurate investigation that doesn't inaccurately target someone is really difficult to even wrap your mind around. And so, again, we have a letter, we have a complaint process, and we have a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty about both.
Well, Jen, one of the reasons I wanted to bring it up here, and you and I, by the way, we don't frequently speak to current events just because they change so quickly. And a lot of our listeners will find our material archived, and so they'll be listening to it at sometimes maybe a couple of years after we recorded it. So you and I are always trying to think about, okay, what's something that we can be talking about that's going to help someone over time, no matter when they're listening. But I kind of feel like I did back in the pandemic when leaders were kind of pulling together to say, okay, what do we do with this? Because this is something that we haven't had to do before. And so I kind of feel the same way in the time that we're in right now. There just seems to be a lot of uncertainty about what's going to happen next. So I'm curious from your role in supporting schools and principals, what are some other ideas just to keep in mind as you're responding to the questions coming from leaders?
One of the things that I ask, knowing there's not a clear answer, is exactly what you started this episode with, which is, what do we mean by ... And so I think the lack of consistent definitions for terms such as discrimination, diversity, equity, inclusion, we don't have even standard agreed upon definitions. You line up 100 people, you're going to get 100 different perspectives on that. And you're going to get a whole bunch of passion from people who believe their definition is the best. But the truth is, these are all very vague terms, and none are necessarily the terms being targeted. And by that, I mean diversity, equity, inclusion. Those terms are not necessarily tied to discrimination. And so all of them are big words in our minds and our hearts. And for school leaders, some of us have spent a lot of time trying to define them in our own personal minds, and then working with staff, students, parents, communities that might have a different definition. And so I keep that in mind. I keep in mind, if I have a conversation about the Dear Colleague letter, it might be a completely different conversation than the person across from me is having. And so I think it helps to start with that. And then the second thing that, again, I sound like a broken record, but the second thing is just pause. We do not need huge action right now. We need understanding right now.
That's really good. At the risk of adding an additional topic, but I want to add this in the context of, because we are in a new season, a new administration, new things going on in Washington, D.C. This is a really good time for leaders to also tap into people whose expertise is in policy or in law. And I'm just going to give a few plugs. So for principals, secondary or elementary, it's a really good time to stay connected with what's going on in your state principals associations, with your national associations, also with state policymakers who are really good at creating documents and guidance. I was looking at the Washington State's guidance for immigrant students, trying to help schools understand, based on some of the newest actions from the federal government, what are the constitutional rights involved in protecting students, and what are the schools' rights involved in this new era of scrutiny on immigration. And so I'm going to put a link in the show notes to Washington State's OSPI's guidance for immigrant students too, just as another resource, because it's just helpful for me to go to the people who spend a lot of time studying policy and understanding constitutional law, who can write in light of some of these new directives that are coming out. Because frankly, Jen, that's not my expertise. I, as a former administrator, my job was to implement policy, but I'm not qualified to try to be the attorney to interpret it. Having said that, I will say this: I think, to get really practical too, it's really important that we maintain in our own response to these things the kind of professionalism and equanimity. I'm going to use that word you used this year as your word of the year, that presence of mind, that ability to just stay in the moment and remind people, you know what, we're here to take care of kids. We're here to take care of our community. And we are still committed to the same values we've always been committed to, which is that every person counts in this school. And however these things are interpreted, that's the value that is uncompromising for us.
That's right. And, I know many teachers were really freaked out by the idea that their content, their curriculum, or their delivery might be now under scrutiny, and they might have something to worry about. And what I said was, I don't think there's a single teacher that I know of that is doing anything illegal. If that exists, I, as a principal, would really want to know that. And so, rose-colored glasses a little bit here, but I think we're a lot more okay than it feels when something like this comes out. I think the majority, if not most or all teachers, have nothing to worry about. And that's something to remember too. It's easy to get really freaked out when we feel that that we're in trouble. But no, we're not in trouble. We're not in trouble. We got a letter that we need to read and understand. And to your point, we want to make sure we're tapping into experts. I think what's unsettling about this is many of the experts are flummoxed as well. And so, you may have called your district attorney and said, hey, what does this mean? And the attorney said, I don't know, or we're working on it too. So that's a little bit discombobulating, but it doesn't mean that we, again, have to do anything rash right now at all. We just take it in and ask the people that we trust and know to guide us correctly.
Thanks, Jen. And I'll just wrap it up with this too. I posed this question to several leaders last week, and one of them in particular was just saying, you know what, we've made a commitment because of the atmosphere of uncertainty. We've made a commitment to increase the amount of time that we're paying attention to and highlighting our kids' that may be marginalized, our minority students, the diversity that exists within our community, because I think it's also really important right now when people are involved in, for lack of a better word, culture wars, that we just maintain those commitments to the values that we know are best for kids. And so you don't need anybody's permission to celebrate your students and to celebrate your community and to highlight and platform voices and to give people the opportunity to show their talents and their gifts. And that includes all of our kids, and especially those kids who sometimes whose voices may not be heard as loudly as others. And so so whatever documents we're considering, whatever's going on in the political world around us, it's really hard to ignore celebration, Jen. And some of the districts that I've seen that have done the best jobs of keeping that front and center are ones who just intentionally bring those voices in to board meetings, to newsletters, to student assemblies, to parent meetings, to faculty meetings. They're just continuously bringing those voices in to remind their communities we're a place where we are more alike than we are different, and let's celebrate those things about us that are that make each of us unique and beautiful. So I know that may be Pollyannish, but I just wanted to say it.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is a good conversation, and I think everyone who listens should go and have it with whoever it is they work elbow to elbow with every day, and keep reading, keep listening, keep being patient. For clarity will certainly come along at some point.
Well, and if you want to set up a conversation with either Jen or me to talk more directly or to kind of work through your own problem solve, we don't pretend to have the answers, but we certainly love to collaborate and just sit and problem solve. So feel free to reach out. So Jen, that's it for Money Matters. Probably went a little longer than we normally do, but thank you for your insights. And we'll put links to those documents that we mentioned in this week's show notes. But until next time, thank you guys for doing what matters this week. And Jen, how can listeners stay connected with you?
Yep, you can find a form to reach out to me on my website, jenschwanke.com.
And you can find all of our resources and links to other podcast episodes at williamdparker.com. Thanks for doing what matters, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. And thank you for doing what matters.
Monday Matters.